It's always nice when you get sent a new device from a brand new manufacturer, especially one whose name could sound a little bit rude. The Miniloong, and don't laugh, I know, it sounds like some sort of bizarre looking sausage, but I promise you, this one is more of a chipolata off the old block. The Miniloong Pocket 1, normally handhelds like this would be consigned to the back alleys of AliExpress or sold outside school gates by people determined to get you hooked on Super Nintendo. But some pretty big retro handheld resellers have got their hands on this one, and it's actually a unit that was sent to me by Lit NXT. And when I first heard about it, I thought, well, actually, this sounds like quite an interesting idea. I wonder if it will work. Because we've got a very, very saturated market around this price point, not least the TrimUI Smart Pro S, which I've got to admit is a bit of a favourite of mine because it's one of the more powerful Linux-based devices in this sort of area of the hobby. I mean, it's no Xbox Ally X or anything like that running on Bazzite, but you know what I mean. At this price point, handhelds typically have to have something new and unique about them, otherwise people don't pay much attention. I mean, if Ambernic released another H700 device, what's the point in reviewing it? Just slap some different pictures on an old review and you're good to go, right? So what's the unique selling point of this device? Well, the Miniloong Pocket 1 has one analog stick. I wonder if they'll come up with a Pocket 2 that's got two analog sticks at some point. I don't know. But they also have an interchangeable faceplate, presumably for people with two faces, and an interchangeable D-pad as well. But crucially, there is only one option that comes with the device, and I can't find anywhere that's selling alternatives. And you can't take a look at its specifications for uniqueness either. The Miniloong Pocket 1 has the Rockchip RK3566, which has appeared in so many budget handhelds at this point, it now qualifies for its own loyalty card. It's not a bad chip within its limits, in fact it's very good, more powerful than the H700 that we've mentioned earlier. But what it's not in 2026 is a reason to pay attention to a new device. Or is it? You see, the fact that this is coming from a company that nobody has heard of actually makes me want to like it. What can I say? I like an underdog, which is a bit like a normal hot dog, it's just not cooked as much. We've seen some fascinating devices from companies that are new to this industry, in one way or another at least. Magic X springs to mind with something like the 040 from last year, a handheld console specifically built around that Tate and DS experience with big flappy ears like Dumbo the elephant. But that Magic X, well, it had something different. It didn't need to hold a special feather in order to make it fly. Their sister company, Zoo Retro, weren't quite as lucky with the Zoo 20 V32, which was a real shame because I really liked that device, and it meant that other handhelds from that company have basically just been put on ice. Miniloong may quickly find that they are not in an enviable position being the new kids on the chopping block. And after all, they don't have the community to fall back on. They don't have custom firmware and months of documented real-world feedback. All it has is this modular design, custom operating system, and after a few weeks on Western shelves, the customer review count of a classified document. So this is going to be a bit of an interesting one, because we've got to ask ourselves whether the Miniloong Pocket 1 is something that is going to make you sit up and beg, or does it belong in the doghouse? Now, before we start, I have to do my due diligence and let you know that this unit was sent over by Lit NXT, although no money has changed hands and they have got no editorial control whatsoever. I'm completely free to say and do anything that I want within the realms of decency, which basically means I've got to keep my shirt on. And what we've got here is a little bit of a mystery, because this is a company that nobody had heard of 8-10 weeks ago. And in the best traditions of all true crime podcasts, I am going to explore that now without actually revealing who the killer is. Because we don't know. I mean, as mysteries go, it's a little bit like Jack the Ripper. It's just a lot less stabby. Inside the box is the device itself, the USB-C cable and a manual. In terms of hardware, this is rocking the Rockchip RK3566 with 1GB of LPDDR RAM, and it's got 2 microSD card slots, each expandable up to 1TB. You've got a 3.5mm headphone jack, which is always nice to see, a mini HDMI output for connecting to a television, and the USB-C port for power and peripherals. The battery is 4000 mAh, which should give you somewhere in the region of 4 to 6 hours of gameplay, depending on what you're playing. And you've got a 4-inch screen with 960 by 720 pixels and a 4:3 aspect ratio. And finally, this has got a single Hall effect stick with RGB lighting so you can find it in the dark. And this doesn't feel like a new device from a company. The shell is solid, it's got nice plastics on it. You've got a grippy texture that actually grips, which sounds like a very low bar, but most handhelds still can't drink at it. This has a level of build quality that a brand with no track record in handhelds simply shouldn't be able to stumble on by accident. And it doesn't stop there. They've chosen a phenomenal 4-inch IPS panel at 960 by 720, which means that you get Game Boy Advance at 4x integer scaling, PS1 at 3x resolution. It's the sort of scale that retro enthusiasts seek out when choosing a dedicated PS1 device. Super Nintendo, NES, Game Boy, Mega Drive, they all land exactly as they should. Whoever chose this screen really knew what they were doing. We've had some really good options in terms of handheld panels recently. Anybody who is into the TrimUI brick or the brick hammer will know exactly what I'm talking about. Or the Anbernic 476H. There is some really good LCD stuff on the market right now, even if it's not OLED, and yet whatever panel they put in this thing, it holds its own against the best of those devices. It's not as big as, perhaps, it's not got quite as many dots per inch, maybe, but it's still something that looks an awful lot better than comparable consoles. Pocket Air Mini, I'm looking at you. And that refinement makes its way across to the controls as well. The D-pad itself is a Sega-style cross-design, and it's got a really satisfying travel, and it's really comfortable to hold as well. It is interchangeable. We just don't have anything to interchange it with at the moment. It can also be a little bit difficult to get back in if you take it out, because it's got this preferred orientation which communicates itself exclusively through the experience of not working until you happen upon the right direction. But once it's in, it's in. Rocking it backwards and forwards lets you pass the Kirby pancake test, which is back by popular demand after the Chuck Rock belly bumping test was deemed too offensive for YouTube. The face buttons are a membrane style. They're quite quiet with a decent amount of travel. They feel quite nice under your thumb, and I always feel that it's very easy for some of these cheaper devices to have face buttons that can stress your thumb out over time. And if you don't want one of your digits in therapy, then this isn't a bad choice at all. The shoulder buttons too are stacked, which is brilliant. It is exactly what most people ask for in units like this. They are not, however, analog, which is a little bit of a disappointment. But then you look at other units like the RG Vita and Vita Pro, which have just been released, and they're more expensive, but they still have those digital triggers as well. So it doesn't seem to be a problem that's limited to just this manufacturer. The problem, of course, is that we are starting to get used to devices like the Mangmi Air X with analog triggers that costs around about the same price, maybe $20 to $30 more when the dust settles. What they've chosen to do here is very good. It just feels like they're coming into 2026 with a device that was perfect for early 2025. And then we come on to the single Hall effect analog stick. This feels really nice. It is a comfortable stick. It's the sort of stick that you get on the Ioneer Pocket Air Mini, but there is also only one of them. And as the movie producer said to the one-legged man who wanted to play Tarzan,
"I've got nothing against your right leg. The trouble is, neither have you."
I think I can see why they've done this. There aren't very many games that this is going to be able to play that requires the use of a second stick. But some of the games that do, like Ape Escape, for example, this is always the option that I use, always the example that I want to sort of leap towards, because I like playing that game. They're quite popular games, and with Anbernic including sticks on even cheaper devices, I do wonder if this might end up being a mistake. The other thing we have sitting on its own on the right-hand side of the console is the speaker. It's a single front-facing speaker and it sounds nice and clear, but there is only one of them. Whether or not this bothers you is going to be a very personal thing, but if you're after something that has stereo sound for those games that support it, then you'll either need to use headphones or look elsewhere. The modular design is truly interesting, but I'm just not sure it's much of a selling point. Had they included a second D-pad in the mix or different faceplates, it might have at least been a nice gimmick. The faceplate itself is better than I expected. It attaches solidly, doesn't wobble, and if you really wanted to, you could paint or decorate inside it and have a really nice console. But that assumes that you're going to be able to find clean versions of the faceplate at some point in the future, or maybe a differently decorated one, I don't know. But if this device doesn't become popular, you might be left trying to 3D print your own. So overall, even though there are a few niggles, the controls are good and the hardware is solid for the price points. Software-wise, you've got a Linux-based operating system called Long OS, which boots up using 2 O's for eyes. They're like puppy dog's eyes, the sort of puppies that are incredibly endearing until you realise that one of them's just shat on the carpet. It's laid out a little bit like Ambernic's RG launcher, and for a custom system, it's actually an awful lot better than I was expecting. It is let down if you're the sort of person who wants to add their own ROMs and scrape box art, because I didn't find a way to do this in the launcher itself. And unless you get a game card that comes with one of these things, then you'll be hard-pressed to figure it out and figure out where you've got to put all the files and folders and everything. But I've left probably the most important part till last, and that's the actual games that you can actually play on this actual thing. We're pretty much going to take everything PlayStation and below, and we're just going to put it into a box that says, runs better than a Sprinter after a very heavy curry. It's Nintendo 64, Dreamcast and PSP where the cracks begin to show, which is kind of what you'd expect from this chipset. PSP games actually run fairly admirably. Whilst not all games will run at full speed, you will be able to have a lot of fun with a good selection of items from that catalogue. My favourite here is Little Big Planet, and this is one of my favourite PSP titles anyway, because you just can't get it on other things. Sackboy's available, sure, but the servers are shut down and it's a pain to emulate and so on and so forth. But look, the Miniloong is a little hampered by the fact that it's got a small screen. God of War runs at about 20 frames a second, Grand Theft Auto at about 30 frames a second. They're both playable, with Grand Theft Auto being a little bit more playable. I have to admit, it's not actually a bad experience overall, but it's not perfect. One thing to remember, pausing the game and changing the settings changes the settings for that individual game. Global changes means backing out onto the main PPSSPP menu, changing what you want and then reloading. Although that's something that could be a little bit hampered for people if they don't speak Chinese. Because out of the box, PPSSPP is set to Chinese. Now, I don't speak Chinese, so I had a frustrating few moments of booting up another device, finding out what each setting meant, changing it on the Miniloong, and then finally I was able to read it in English. My English isn't much better than my Chinese, to be fair. Another problem was the aspect ratio, which by default has been set to 0.85. This is not the proper aspect ratio, and things like that really annoy me. You can change the display settings in the main settings of the device, but many games also came with custom settings out of the box, which means that you've got to reconfigure that aspect ratio for every single game. Nintendo 64 is a bit of a mixed bag. As always, GoldenEye will technically run, but it's with slowdown and with more stuttering than a nervous public speaker on a pogo stick. And of course, you can't play it because it's only got one stick. F-Zero X also displayed a lot of stuttering and a lot of slowdown. Lighter games like Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart are playable, but I have noticed, again, an awful lot of audio stuttering, even on lighter titles. And you can't go into the settings to tinker around, because as soon as you press the menu button, you get kicked out of the game. Dreamcast is possibly the most frustrating of the lot. First of all, they haven't mapped the left and right trigger buttons properly. You can press the menu button and you can go and do this yourself in the settings, but even if you do, you'll be left with some games that will struggle to run, with similar sorts of audio stuttering that we've just talked about with the N64 titles. I actually had a bit of a problem here, because like I said, the card that they sent me got corrupted. And so I had to set up my own card. Not a problem usually. I've added a collection of Dreamcast games that I usually use for testing, and they just wouldn't run. And for some reason, it wouldn't recognize the CHD files that I had, and I had to go back to using uncompressed GDI files, which takes a little bit more processing power anyway. The result was that heavier titles like Crazy Taxi, Sonic Adventure 2, and Sega Rally had audio stuttering. The games play fine, they emulate fine, but the audio wasn't working properly. Other games like Soul Calibur and Donald Duck Going Quackers, I don't know how you say that, but that was a pretty fun game to play. That seemed to work all right, but you do have limitations on this chipset. So where does that leave us? Well, what you have here is actually a phenomenal piece of hardware, which is built on a chip that we are very, very familiar with at this point. For everything below PlayStation 1, this is a really solid retro gaming console that feels good in the hand, has an excellent build quality, and really delivers on that screen. I cannot stress enough, this is a beautiful display. And along with that comes Bluetooth and HDMI out with a separate charging port, which means that you can consoleize this. You can plug it into a television and play on a big screen. You can even play with friends. It sits comfortably alongside devices like the TrimUI Brick for both power and performance, but the one problem here is the software. I think Miniloong have done a very, very good job with the firmware that they've got here, but it has annoyances and some rough edges that really need to be knocked off. Not least the old versions of emulators and shipping devices to the Western market with Chinese interfaces. But there is no doubt in my mind that if this device was running a custom firmware like Rocknix, it would take things to a completely new level. And it would open up the capabilities of that console, because we know what this chip can do, and it can do just a little bit more than the Miniloong can currently do. I'm hoping that we'll get custom firmware with not too long in the future, but you never know with these things. That's what I think anyway, and I'd love to know what you think in the comments below. What do you think about the Miniloong Pocket 1? Are you interested in its modular design? Does the build quality intrigue you enough to give this one a chance? As always, the conversations continue in the comments, and whilst you're down there, why not leave a like, subscribe, and if you would like to help out the channel, there is now Patreon available. You don't get anything other than my heartfelt thanks and gratitude, but every time you donate, an angel gets an album by Wings. But that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and until next time, thanks ever so much for coming along. And it only remains for me to say one final thing. Happy gaming.